what do you recommend for somebody, let's say me, if I wanted to learn German, what do you think the best resource is for me to start learning that new language?
The best resource, that really does come down to a kind of personal preference. Like people will say like, I tried this and I didn't like it. And I'm there going, how did you not like it? It's amazing. But eventually we want to get to the same thing, which is being in situations in which the language holds meaning for you. So when the language can impart a meaning to you that you understand, then that is when you'll start picking up the language. So if you spend enough hours in a state of the language imparting meaning to you, then you'll pick it up. So whatever the most effective way to get at that for the language in question. So for German, that might mean switching Netflix to German and watching a show that you've already watched in German, but it probably wouldn't mean that in Mandarin unless you were already fluent in Japanese or something like that. And even then, I'm not sure how much phonetically they have in common, but I think they have a lot of characters in common. But that's kind of the lens through which I approach it, because otherwise I say, I hear someone wants to learn German and I say like, oh, try this app, and they use it and they don't like it. And what I really want to tell them is you want to get yourself into a situation in which the language holds a meaning for you, which is why so many people do. I don't recommend moving to that country necessarily. And you can certainly move to a country and never become fluent in the language. But so many people who do move to the country do end up becoming fluent in the language, because it's very likely to be coupled. It's very likely to lead to them being in situations where the language holds meaning. And if it's a language like German, it's like, willst du eine Trink or whatever, then it's like, okay, I'm getting that you want to offer me a drink.
Well, it's ironic that you say that, because a part of me thought you might answer, just go immerse yourself fully, like go live there or go dive in. But it seems to me like there isn't really a one size fits all answer for that type of question.
I really think that depends on the person. There's an Australian comedian who says he lived in Norway for like 9 years or something, doesn't speak a word of Norwegian. I'm sure he speaks a word. But, he doesn't speak Norwegian because you don't have to. Like, Norway, some of the best English speakers in the world. You don't need to speak Norwegian. But had he have wanted to learn Norwegian, that would have been a different story. So I don't think that being in the country isn't the answer. It's really, is it the answer to what you're trying to do? So I'm trying to get to Sweden sooner rather than later, hopefully this year, because for me, it's kind of it's not the final frontier, but it's like the one thing I haven't done is being like surrounded by Swedes. I have actually done it in small doses, but I can watch Swedish without subtitles. I can listen to Swedish audiobooks and give you a summary of the book. I can read without the audiobook, whatever, but that's all different to actually being there. And so that's kind of the answer to my shortcomings in Swedish at the moment. Right. But that wouldn't be the answer for like someone who's just like, oh, I just want to learn Swedish. How do I learn Swedish? That's not what I would tell them to do. Even if we had unlimited resources, I wouldn't just say go live in Sweden, because they'll just speak to you in English.
One thing that I've found interesting when I've tried to learn new languages is learning a new language requires a great deal of consistency. It's not like you can just open your phone and learn it in 5 minutes, or, obviously you need to work at it for some time. And one of the things that I found daunting is that initial learning curve to where you feel even remotely comfortable speaking a new language. Would you have any advice for how to stay consistent during some of the more difficult parts of learning a new way to speak?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I struggle with this too. I go really heavy in on things for like a reasonably short time. And I'm one of those people that as soon as the kind of curiosity curve drops off for me, I'm just like, I'm not interested in that thing anymore. Like, it doesn't hold any mysteries to me. So one thing I have found somewhat helpful, and it's not always perfect, but is to kind of set myself a task within that goal that's like, that's a task-based goal. So for task-based, I don't know if I said that properly. It'll be like to read this book and write a summary of it in Swedish. That might be a bit hard for where people are up to, but to read this short story and then have a conversation with their teacher about it. And for me, the important thing is not to have like marks around that. So it's not to be like, oh, you failed because you didn't use this number of words or whatever. It's like if you booked the lesson and you read the book and you tried to have the conversation with the teacher, then you passed. It's just in uni, they call it like a task-based assessment or something. It's just like, as soon as you've done it, you've done it. And to kind of set those little goals for myself. So I actually had this struggle in Spanish a little bit because I started learning Spanish really just because I had the opportunity to go to Mexico. So I kind of decided I'll use the opportunity to go to Mexico to kind of dive into Spanish. But I still wasn't really I was never really turned on for Spanish. I was like, Okay. So that's when I decided it'd be an interesting video, if nothing else, to do the whole Anki 1,000 Spanish words in one day. There's a company that makes an Anki deck of 1,000 words in Spanish. And I was like, if I just did that whole thing in one day and filmed it, and that was a really fun thing to do. But it also it's definitely not the most effective way to learn the 1,000 most common words in Spanish.
It probably made it a little bit fun, right?
Oh, it was so fun. Compared to how, I don't like that kind of stuff normally. Right. And I certainly wouldn't have enjoyed doing 10 cards a day for 100 days, which is how they recommend doing it. And I'm not saying that's a bad recommendation, but I wouldn't enjoy it.
Well, when you say cards, do you mean like flashcards? Like when I think of how to learn a language, I imagine the way I used to, which is me sitting down at a desk with flashcards, just flipping through them, 50 a day for a month. And I think now we have other options, right? There are apps, there are other ways to immerse yourself that might A, be more fun, as you just noted, and B, more effective.
Yeah, it's this isn't like the humble flashcard for anyone sitting at home picturing a literal card with an English word on the front and a Spanish word on the back. For starters, it's flipped. So the best research suggests that the way to do it is actually to have the Spanish on the front and let's say you're trying to learn Spanish, have the Spanish on the front and then on the back have English or the meaning. But the thing about modern flashcard apps, so Anki is, for those who don't know, is essentially a flashcard app, but it's digital. So you don't just have the option of a front and a back. You have the option of a front and a middle and a back and a second back, or, which is not how this company does it. They just do a front and a back. But then there's also an audio example. So it might be talk, and then on the front is hablar, and then on the back is to talk. And then there's a sentence like estás hablando, and you are talking, and it won't be just that's not the word hablar. It's in a sentence, so it's actually conjugated, and it'll be longer than estás hablando. But the other thing that's really clever about this particular deck is that it'll later use that same word in a different example.
I see.
So if the word for TV comes up, then it'll be there were people talking on the TV. And so you're reinforcing it, and it's much more, for want of a better word, immersive than we traditionally think of flashcards. And having said all that, I'm not saying that everyone must use Anki.
Oh, right.
I'm just saying that a lot of people hear flashcards and just immediately go, no, not for me, no context. And it's no, there is context. Some of my flashcards in Swedish go for 3 minutes, as in there's 3 minutes of audio on the back of this whole context, because there's no limit to it's literally just pointing to a file on your computer.
Yeah.
So I'll have the front will be the Swedish word gräsklippare, which is lawnmower. That's just what I thought of. But on the back, it won't necessarily just be something that reminds me what lawnmower is. It'll be this whole thing that I thought had 14 really useful words. And I'll just sit there listening to it. And it's not a matter of do you remember this? Yes or no, pass, fail. It's just oh yeah, this sentence exists. This whole paragraph exists.
And so it feels it's not really a, yes, I've finally learned the language. It's a very, it's an iterative process. You slowly start to piece these things together over time. And it's not just knowing the words, it's understanding the context, understanding how it's spoken, the sentences that it's used in.